Welcome, gentle reader. We're so happy to have you back with us in this next episode of Everything is Everything. Tell me, Amit, how come we are color coordinated around slightly different shades of blue?
Well, maybe we both love the blues. That could be one reason. Though these days, I have to tell you, I've been listening to another genre of music entirely.
Which is?
Which is called shoegaze. Can you guess
Shoegaze.
what is shoegaze?
No, I cannot
So let me tell
imagine.
you about this. I didn't know this word till a few days ago, and we are recording in the middle of April, dear gentle readers. So by the time the episode releases, I would have moved on to something else, perhaps. But I listen to a lot of Yola Tango. I've been doing that recently. Beautiful song called Nowhere Near, one of the great love songs, linked from the show notes under my chair, and Spotify keeps recommending interesting things. So a few days ago, I got this recommendation for shoegaze playlist based on your listening. So I was like, what the fuck is shoegaze? So I started listening, and there was a Yola Tango song in the start, which is how I figured that, okay, it's taken it from Yola Tango. And then, and what I like to do is I'll let these random playlists play, and if I like something, then I explore further. And then there was a band I really liked. So I quickly go to my Spotify, and it's a band called Galaxy 500, right? So I was like, what is Galaxy 500? And I, clicked on them. I listened to another song. I said, my God, this is amazing. Then memories came back, a flashback came back. In the early 90s, I was deeply into alternative rock, and I was living in India procuring my music from here. So I have no idea how I was into alternative rock or how I got the music. But one of my favorite bands in the early to mid 90s was a band called Luna. And they have this great album called Luna Park, linked from the show notes under my chair, right? And a lot of stuff under my chair. And their singer guitarist was a guy called Dean Wareham. And I had the vague idea that he's done something before. But in India, where albums aren't available and you're getting like Deep Purple and Michael Jackson everywhere, there was no way of procuring it. And this earlier band of Dean Wareham was Galaxy 500. So I'm going to make my first recommendation of the day. Brilliant album called On Fire, which is on Spotify. You got to listen to it. Now, what is shoegaze? Okay, so shoegaze as a genre is this, that there were a bunch of bands around that time in England and America, but really from the alternative scene, uh, who would who would have a kind of a guitar based sound where the guitar was very feedbacky and there were effects on it, and the vocals would often be so indistinct that it was endogenous, and so on and so forth. And they would often have this sort of image that they'd go out on stage in their live performances and they wouldn't move. They'd just stand there, and the guitarist would be looking at his pedals near his feet all the time to produce his effects, and therefore shoegaze. So this is like my new sort of passion at the moment, and whenever I get into some new music, I'll be listening to nothing but that for 2 weeks, and then suddenly I'll move on to something else. But this is an old love come true, and I'm really enjoying this.
I just want to say that when you talk about the probability of track given genre, that's a normal probability problem. When you want to reverse map from a track to a genre, the probability of genre given track, there is a nice Bayes theorem application.
Sergi, I'm talking about art, I'm talking about music, I'm talking about the soul. आप mathematical theory ला रहे हो बीच में this.
Yeah, so I was just thinking that, the system knows that I like this song. How do you back up to the genre?
So I was the kind of person who never, by the way, listened too much to new music. I was stuck in my comfort zone. With books, movies, I'm checking out new stuff. With music, I was in a comfort zone. Van Morrison sunenge and stuff I like, I'll listen to that. I'll be happy there. But recently, because of the randomized playlist that the Spotify algo shows me, I've gotten into this sort of loop that if a random playlist starts after something I'm listening to, I'll just let it play till something strikes me and explore further. And I feel good about this.
So I also have been the beneficiary of new music thanks to YouTube Music. There was a friend of mine, and I recently solved the following question: what are the two most recent songs that you know? Okay, and your answer is probably 2024 and 2024. Okay, for me, like at first instinct, my answer would be like November Rain 1992. That would be my normal thinking. I actually thought carefully about it, and I discovered that I know one song, I know and love one song from 2017 and one song from 2018.
Instantly tell me which are these.
2017 is Harry Styles' The Sign of the Times.
And he's bloody good, huh?
Yeah.
We should not look down on new artists. 2018.
2018, there's a song by Lady Gaga and somebody else. I'm struggling to remember the name, but it was 2018. And I
Is
thought,
it Shallow? Is Shallow the song?
yes.
That is the one. Yeah, some
Yeah.
awesome covers of it as well.
Okay.
You and I should perform Shallow sometime. I'll do the high parts.
So Amit, tell me, there's an English word luxury like Louis Vuitton and Indian hotels, and there is a word like beliefs, which is like Bayes theorem and trigonometry. Okay, how do you put these together?
So I don't put these together. There's a gentleman called Rob Henderson, a very fine thinker you should follow, a young man in his 30s. He just come out with a great book about growing up in foster homes. Highly recommended. Tyler Cowen also spoke about it on his blog Marginal Revolution. So Rob Henderson came up with the term luxury beliefs, and this is his definition of it. Luxury beliefs are ideas and opinions that confer status on the upper class while often inflicting costs on the lower classes. And this immediately struck a chord because a lot of the beliefs I see around me, the ideological beliefs, mostly from the left but some from the right as well, are what I consider luxury beliefs. That the elites are sitting in their living room, everything is air conditioned, they are writing into their MacBooks, and they are discussing which luxury headphone to buy next to add to the three they already have. Ki yaar iska, ambient sound cancelling is not so funky, and they are giving grand policy ideas which will hurt the poor, right? And these beliefs are fashionable. They give them a certain kind of status, perhaps. They're a sign of status, if not absolute luxury, but they hurt the poor and they give them nevertheless. And it really makes me angry because, like you, I've taken inspiration from Gandhiji's words that whenever you think of a policy, the first thing that you must think about is the impact of that policy on the poor. And especially in India, where we are a poor country and solving poverty is it's a moral question. I take this to heart, and I find that many of the policies, which the elites recommend, actually harm the poor. So I want to, dig a little bit into those and go into a handful of those.
Yes, please. So, give me one example of this kind of phenomenon.
One example is socialism, right? Now, we discussed in an earlier episode, episode 42, about populism, how certain words, people don't really understand what they mean because populism is confused with popular. Nationalism is confused with caring for the nation. Both mean something completely different from that and are deeply toxic words. And socialism is another such word, where many people think that socialism, in a vague kind of sense, means what's good for society. And I'll often do episodes of The Seen and the Unseen with people who are today in their 50s and 60s, and they'll be talking about the good old days of socialism and how much they care about it. And I'm like, no, wait a minute. You are elite now, you were elite then, you were in a good household, you have the luxury of this belief. But socialism kept us poor for decades longer than we should have been. Hundreds of millions of people in poverty. Now, the strict dictionary definition of socialism, if you're going to look at that, is really about public ownership of private property, where freedom is frowned upon, individual liberty is frowned upon, state coercion is everything, and the state is either owning most of the property that there is. In communism, it owns 100%, of course. Socialism is like a midway there. And the state owns a lot of the property and it regulates the rest. And there is automatically, therefore, the sense that you are not a citizen, you are a subject, that freedom is not the default condition, it is what is granted to you by the state. Socialism is deeply toxic. I think of, for me, the two words that I really care about and think about are consent and coercion, right? I care deeply about consent. It has an absolute value. And socialism is equal to coercion, right? And we have seen the history of the 20th century is a history of the failure of socialism, a failure of coercion. It is a deeply toxic ideology. And it makes me mad that people will proudly say on their Twitter bios, I am a socialist, and, that all these guests of mine who were there in the 80s will say, हाँ हमारा socialism अच्छा था. One guest even said to me that, I bemoan the fact that the Soviet Union fell apart. And I, of course, pushed back and I said, I think it's the best thing that happened for all of us, though it was no panacea, because some of those ideas are back. And I think, these toxic ideas are back in circulation and fashionable again because we have a young generation that is growing up that feels virtuous at the thought of doing good for society and using the state to do that and not caring about the unseen cost of it. And they haven't seen the horrors of socialism, which, you and I have experienced, read about, and thought about. And what particularly gets my goat, and there are two things, I often ask guests on The Seen and the Unseen, what gives you hope and what gives you despair? And there is one thing that gives me both. right? During the protests against the CAA, and I support the protests and oppose the CAA. I had a great episode on this with Srinath Raghavan. It gave me a lot of hope that young people across the country were not being apathetic, that they were, going to the streets to protest, and also that they were doing it by holding up the preamble of our constitution. Gave me great hope. What filled me with despair was that that was Indira's preamble, not Ambedkar's preamble. And Indira's preamble has the word socialism in it, and it is a toxic, dangerous word. Now there is, and it's not a word that anybody should, profess their fealty to. It is a reason for our poverty and our backwardness. It is, in fact, the reason for the politics we have today indirectly. If we were a prosperous country, we would be in a different place. And I understand, in a sense, why they choose to hold that version of the constitution up, because it also has the word secular. You and I both believe in secularism. And it was actually debated in Ambedkar's time that should the word secular and socialist be there. And Ambedkar's answer was no. And Ambedkar's response was that as far as secular is concerned, if we inscribe the value into every article of our constitution, we don't need to state it. That's just signaling, right? And his reason for socialist was that what system of economic organization there should be is a question for politics, not for the constitution. Let the people figure that out. Let the political process figure that out. And it so happens that Ambedkar himself at that time, for reasons one can go into, said we should have a socialistic form of organization. But by the 1950s, and this is a great man, a great thinker who contained multitudes, by the 1950s it changed his mind on that. I've had a great episode of The Seen and the Unseen with the great Dalit thinker Chandrabhan Prasad ji, who tells me his heroes are Ambedkar and Adam Smith. And I suspect Ambedkar would have approved of that, because he looked at capitalism in a very different way in the 1950s, so one has to see his full body of work. But that's an aside. It's an aside to give context to why people hold up the Indira preamble, because they want the word secular, and in today's times, you could argue there is resonance to that. But I would point their attention to the fact that it contains a word socialist. It is not a harmless word meaning for the good of society. It is a word that implies state coercion, that implies centralization, that implies many of the things we bemoan in the modern Indian state today, and that were written into the constitution, in fact.
I just want to say to everybody that it's an interesting exercise. Please go get a copy of the Communist Manifesto by Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. And at the end of the book, they translate all their ideas and fervent beliefs into a program for action. And they have a checkpoint, they have a checklist of the program for action. And you'll be astonished at how much of that is in modern India. So, in many ways, modern India is the kind of communist paradise that Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels wanted.
Because ultimately, communism is about state coercion, it is about centralizing power. And we see a lot of that happening today as well. And in fact, for all 5 years plus of our existence. So, yeah.
Amit, tell us your next example of luxury beliefs.
So my next example of a luxury belief is a word, and the word is inequality, right? And let me begin with a story, and this is a story I get from Steven Pinker's book Enlightenment Now, where he talks of two Russian farmers, Boris and Igor, right? And Boris has a goat. Igor does not have a goat. So Igor goes to the authority and says, it's not fair. Boris has a goat. I don't have a goat. So the authority says, what do you want to do? And he says, kill Boris's goat, right? And what do you have if you kill Boris's goat? That's the end of inequality, right? And neither of them has a goat. And I think about this often because there is a fundamental difference between inequality and poverty. Now, in our last episode, we spoke about the zero-sum fallacy, right? If the world was actually zero-sum, if for the rich to get richer, the poor would have to get poorer, in that case, inequality and poverty would lead to the same direction, right? That if there was more poverty, then there would be more inequality, because where is the wealth going? It's going to the top. But actually, we live in a positive sum world, and that is not the case. How growth happens is that growth is spread across the spectrum in whatever proportion. The poor go richer, the rich go more richer, inequality goes up. Right? What has happened since the liberalization of 1991? Hundreds of millions of people have come out of poverty because of whatever increased freedoms were granted to us. Not enough, in my opinion and your opinion, but enough to make that difference. Poverty went down, inequality went up. Right? A question that I often ask people, and this is like a thought experiment for you, dear listener, dear reader. We are not listeners, we are readers. In which of these two countries would you rather be poor, the USA or Bangladesh? And the answer, everybody will say, I would rather be poor in the USA. But the truth is that the USA has greater inequality, Bangladesh has greater poverty. Poverty is the key. And in India, our moral imperative is to lift hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. Now, this is not merely a semantic question. It is a question with real world consequences, because how you treat inequality is by killing Boris's goat. Right? You make both people equally poor. How you treat poverty is through economic growth. Economic growth in a poor country at the stage that we are in will inevitably lead to higher inequality. That is fine, right? There is this great book by the philosopher Harry Frankfurt called On Inequality, right? And he has what he calls a doctrine of subsistence, where he says that what I care about, and he makes similar arguments there, but he's a philosopher. So slightly different, you should read that book. It's a slim sort of booklet. And the doctrine of sufficiency is that you define what is enough for a man to live on. Right? You define that, and then you try to get everyone to that level. That is what matters. So in a sense, it is a proxy for removing poverty also, that you want everyone to reach that, that level of sufficiency, which you and I would agree we haven't in India. We have failed after all these decades. Every government has failed us in this regard, though some governments have put us in the right directions, especially from 91 to 2011, as we've also discussed a lot. So this is a bugbear of mine, because I think I'll find a lot of people in English-speaking bubbles have been educated in foreign colleges. Some of them are actual working economists. Some of them work for fancy institutions, and there will be inequality, inequality, inequality. And I'm like, boss, this is a fashion of the West. We don't have the luxury to think about inequality, because we need to solve poverty first. When people are starving in India every day, where a large proportion of children are born malnourished, you have no business to say that doesn't matter. Make me feel good about this little fashionable thing. It is, it is deeply immoral, and at the very least, it is ignorant. So all of you who ever use the word inequality, you don't have to agree or disagree with me, but just think about this. What is a greater problem? Poverty or inequality? They're different things. We need to solve for poverty. Only growth will get you there. And, that's sort of my contention and my bugbear.
I want to add some arithmetic to this, because I think many people will agree with this high level proposition, but then they'll say, so I remember I've had a conversation with some, very wise and trusted senior people who kind of say, a little bit of chasing inequality is okay. It will not do a large damage to the growth process. Here the problem is the power of compounding. So let me illustrate. Okay. So if you do the normal redistributionist, elite unfriendly Indian state, you get to a certain growth rate, and if you are able to rise above that stuff and create conditions for creativity and energy and competition led by the Indian elite, you get to a certain higher growth rate. Okay, so I'm going to pluck two numbers just to give you an illustrative calculation, and I think these are roughly correct. I think that in a normal Indian policy environment that is hostile to growth, we end up with a growth rate of about 2 to 3%. For right now, I'm going to say 2% per capita. Okay, we get per capita growth of about 2%. And if we are able to free our minds and create a pro-growth environment, suppose we get to a per capita growth rate of 4%. Okay, so I'm on two numbers, 2% and 4%. I'm not making adventurous leaps of South Korean 25 years at 10% per capita GDP growth. Quite modest. I'm being slow and careful, and I'm saying in a happy, economically sound policy framework, we get to 4% per capita GDP growth, and when you get to Indian socialism, you get to 2% per capita GDP growth. It's a gap of 200 basis points. Sounds like a small number. Now, let me translate these into years to doubling. Okay, so you have to divide by 70, the rule of 70. So at a 2% growth, rule of 70 is 35 years to doubling, 70 years to quadrupling. And at a 4% growth, it is 16 years to doubling, 32 years to quadrupling. So there you go. You have a choice that in 32 years is a visible planning horizon for people today. Okay, so our wonderful Nomsita is at an age where 32 years out is an entirely feasible and a practical dimension to her life. And
32 years later, she'll be younger than you are now.
so 32 years is an entirely practical and visible date, and we're talking a 4x gain in income for the country as an average, which is cool. I think it's something that is lovely and worth hankering after. 70 years, that is like so far out that you can barely understand it. And this came out of an apparently small difference, 2%, 4%. You think only 200 basis points, but there's a power of compounding.
And also an additional problem there is that if you think about why it is, if you think about these two as, different approaches, that to solve poverty, you need growth. To solve inequality, and I don't even like to use the word solve because, nothing wrong with it. But to tackle inequality, you need redistribution. That it is cognitively easier to come to terms with redistribution and to sell it. You feel virtuous. I will take Boris's coat, I will cut half of it and I will give that half to Igor and I will give the half with Boris. And you think you've solved both people's problems, but actually you don't, because tomorrow neither of them has a goat and you've got more equality. And it is just messed up, but it makes you feel virtuous. कि ठीक है, we will tax the rich more. I'm also rich, but I'm saying we'll tax the rich more, and it makes you feel virtuous, and all of this shit happens. And yeah, that's why it's like difficult to fight. It is tempting to just be intellectually lazy and not have to make the difficult case for something what appears to be as nebulous as growth-driven policies, and say that inequality, let's do something about that. And it's driving the country backwards. And I want people to have the rigor and the moral honesty to kind of look within and ask them what is really good for the poor, as Gandhiji said.
Amit, give us your third idea.
So my third idea of luxury beliefs is actually now an idea from the right, because we've been shitting on the left, as indeed we should, but we should also shit on the right, because both the right and the left are often united by their love for state coercion, and we don't like coercion. What don't we like, Ajay Shah?
The lack of freedom.
Okay, the lack of freedom. Well done. So we don't like the lack of freedom. So here's the thing. My third idea is victimless crimes. Right? So the right will get all moralistic and say prostitution is bad, ban prostitution. Or they will say that betting is bad, match fixing is terrible, ban betting, and so on and so forth. Alcohol is bad, look at the social evil, ban it. And all of these actually have terrible consequences and get the opposite impact. For example, a logic for criminalizing prostitution or the soliciting of prostitution, as it were, it's a bit technical, but in India, for all practical purposes, it's criminalized, right? Now, the idea is, their idea is that prostitution is bad, people should not do immoral things, and also there is trafficking. To which my answer would be that, look, it's a little bit different, because what happens when you ban a victimless crime? The underworld comes in, because you can't do it in a legal way. Where there is underworld, they're paying off the cops anyway, which is how the system works in India. And where there is the underworld, there is coercion, and you can't regulate that shit. The rule of law doesn't apply. The trafficking goes up, right? If you look at Netherlands, prostitution is legal there. You have regulated brothels, which are respected places, which advertise openly. Prostitutes have rights, they pay taxes. Sex workers have rights, they pay taxes. I shouldn't even have corrected the word, because there's nothing wrong with the word prostitute. You and I are prostitutes. We're selling our services for money. I do a lot of things free even, so I'm even worse. So there's nothing wrong in that word. People are selling their services for money, and they are treated just as workers anywhere else, and the level of crime against them is really low. So that is my first case. If you care about trafficking and coercion, make it legal, regulate it. There is nothing wrong with this just because you have your highfalutin morals ki hamare sanskar mein aisa nahi chalta.
If you don't like it, don't partake.
Yeah.
But why do you want to bring state coercion and state power into the picture?
That is exactly the point. And I remember, and I wrote a column about this where I spoke about this talk show I once saw. I think Barkha Dutt was there, Kiran Bedi was there. Barkha Dutt was hosting it and Kiran Bedi was there, and she was being moralistic about it. And there were actual sex workers there saying, listen, we got into it willingly. Like, who the F are you to tell us and to be so patronizing and condescending to us and say that, nahi karna chahiye, majburi hai, ye wo. We chose it as a best option open to us, and you let us make our decisions. And the point is, when the underworld is doing it, a lot of shady stuff happens. especially trafficking and coercion, which may even happen in a legal universe, but you have better chance of regulating it and bringing the perpetrators to justice.
Yeah, I mean,
So,
imagine a person should be comfortable approaching the police and complaining about violence.
exactly.
That should be the engine of a civilized society.
Yeah, and today, unfortunately, there have been instances where a sex worker has complained to the police and the police has taken advantage of the situation. So it is horrendous right now. We've just pushed that entire, both sex workers and, their clients into this dark zone where all kinds of terrible shit happens. The second of my victimless crimes is betting. So just as people conflate prostitution and trafficking, they will conflate betting and match fixing. And they will say, "Arey bhai, match fixing hota hai, ye hota hai, wo hota hai." My point is that make betting legal, get the revenues. That's what England does. In fact, the delightful thing about England, and I happen to know this as a poker player, is that gamblers don't get charged on their winnings. So casinos or the houses get charged. So gamblers get completely tax-free winnings. But leave that aside. I am saying make betting legal. What will happen when you make betting legal? That you will have institutions that will come up, that you can regulate. You can look at the balance sheet. You can figure out kitna ja raha hai, kitna aa raha hai, is everything above board. Match fixing becomes more unlikely. Match fixing happens when you have the underworld coming in. You ban betting, the underworld comes in, all kinds of shit then goes down, and then you have all the kind of scandals that we have. Like today, I believe that cricket is in a place where cricketers make so much money anyway, unlike in the Hansi Cronier days, that the incentives are less for the cricketer to destroy his entire career. But regardless, the danger exists, the underworld exists, and you can solve it. I want to see HDFC and Axis Bank and HSBC open up betting outlets. Just as I have demat accounts, I should be able to kind of bet from those. Why not? Because all of life is a gamble, and we have discussed this in poker as well, that in our poker episode as well, that there is nothing per se immoral about gambling. And you can have, you want to regulate it, then you can regulate it. And we can argue about the extent of regulation. I think I would favor a lighter touch than perhaps you would. But at least it's legit, it is out there. Somebody who has been robbed can go and complain, etc., etc. Today, all of that is not possible. There are various other angles at which I can speak about victimless crimes. I've written pieces on it. I'll link it from the show notes. There is, for example, alcohol, where a rich guy sitting in his AC living room will say, alcohol is a social evil, men get drunk and beat their wives, let us ban alcohol. That's not really what happens. What happens when you ban alcohol is that again the underworld takes over, and then they are selling cheap quality toddy and bad liquor, and they're not accountable, and they don't have to care about a brand. It's everything is fly by night, and it creates a bigger problem. There is a great essay by Bruce Yandel called Baptists and Bootleggers, and the idea there is that the person who calls for the ban will be working towards the same purpose as a bootlegger, the underworld guy who comes in and takes over. Their interests are absolutely aligned, which is why I once criticized Shah Rukh Khan's terrible film Raees, because in that he plays a bootlegger, and then a politician comes through the town saying ban alcohol, and Shah Rukh Khan treats him as an enemy. And I'm like, no, in the real world, that's not the case. In the real world, the Shah Rukh Khan character bootlegger is funding the politician, because as long as alcohol stays illegal, he has business. So prohibition is a problem. Back in the day in India, homosexuality was effectively illegal because of 377. Thankfully, it has been struck down. But again, that led to horrendous consequences when it was illegal. I wrote a column called The Matunga Racket many years ago, where what cops would do, and cops would do this, is that they would place ads in these sort of online bulletin boards asking for gay people to come and spend time with them, and these hapless people would go to the railway station in question, which was often Matunga, and then these cops, plainclothes cop, would meet him there, and then they would extort him. They say, we'll tell your family, we'll tell your wife, we'll tell your father, whatever, and they'd go with him to the ATM, they'd use his card, they'd empty it out. That kind of shit would happen. It was a really common racket, and now that shit can't happen. And the point is, if you're sitting in your living room saying, yeah, ye sab sanskari nahi hai, just ban it all. No. Your main principle should be consenting adults should be free to do whatever they want with each other as long as they're not harming anyone else. The left-wingers should realize this should be true in the marketplace. The right-wingers should realize this should be true in the bedroom. Right? Freedom is what matters.
Amit, go on. Luxury beliefs.
Now I want to go on to something that in India is the preserve of both the left and the right, though elsewhere it is considered the preserve of the left, but the populist right is also taking it over, and that is anti-capitalism. right? And that is a broad thing. So people will be sitting in their luxury living rooms with the air condition on full blast, writing in their MacBook with their, AirPods somewhere nearby, and you get the picture. Tweeting on a platform which is a capitalist platform, and they'll be like, late capitalism is this, the neoliberals have done this, all the while taking the benefits themselves, and speaking about capitalism as being the bane of all our problems. Now, here's the thing, that capitalism can have an ugly side to it when it is aligned with power. That's what we call crony capitalism, where, and this is what a lot of people don't realize, that pro-business and pro-market can mean opposite things. A business will always try to ally with the government and use state power to keep competition out so it retains control of the market. And that's cronyism, and that's terrible. But true capitalism, as in true free markets, are where the state doesn't interfere too much besides the rule of law, which is critical and important and necessary. But besides that, it doesn't interfere too much in competition. And therefore, the only way you can make someone better off, because it's a double thank you moment, as we discussed in the last episode, is by serving them. So the great companies of this world are companies that I celebrate because they became so big by making millions of lives better off in ways that persist, like Amazon. So many of the people who rant against Amazon will also order from Amazon because it's convenient, next day pahunch jayega, right? And there are many anti-capitalist tropes. Like, one of them is sweatshops are bad. I'm like, sweatshops are amazing. Sweatshops are bad because, yes, you don't want someone to work in a sweatshop, but that person is working in a sweatshop because it is the best option open to them. Unless they've been abducted and it's slavery. But modern slavery is very rare or not there at all, and that's not even what they mean. They refer to the kind of sweatshops companies like Apple and my favorite H&M will have, allegedly have. And my point is, no, sweatshops are great. Those people chose to work in a sweatshop because it was the best option open to them. Respect their agency, respect their decision, right? And I have examples of where this can go horrendously wrong, right? I wrote a column on child labor once. You and I agree child labor is horrible. No child should have to work. A child should, live a life of leisure, stress-free, and, a good kind of education. And we will soon do an episode on education as well, on how that can be better and is functional in India. Children should not work. But the point is, if you're going to outlaw child labor for sitting from a Western country and saying child labor is bad, you got to think of the consequences. So I wrote a column on this. I'll link to various studies, and the column will be under my chair. And Oxfam did a study in Bangladesh where 30,000 children were laid off from alleged sweatshops because the Western activists complained, right? And many of their lives were devastated. Many of the girls went into prostitution. Many of the boys turned to criminality. Similarly, UNICEF did a study in Nepal where there was a scandal over carpets being manufactured by children. 5 to 7,000 children, in that range, 5 to 7,000 children were laid off. The girls practically uniformly went into prostitution. Their lives became worse. Let's understand the mentality of a parent. There is no parent in the world who wants a child to work in a factory or a sweatshop. They do it because the family is in such a situation that any option is worse. And those options could be the girls go into prostitution, you can't feed the boys, they're out on the streets, all kinds of terrible thing happens and their lives are destroyed. There's no way out of that, right? That is a choice. Sitting in an elite air-conditioned room, we say, nahi, factory mein mat kaam karwao. They should study in a good school. But who's going to put them in a good school? You need prosperity for that. You need growth. And that's not happening, given where we are. And there are plenty of studies which, Kaushik Basu has a great study. Alan Kruger has a great study. Eric Edmonds, I think, is another person who has a great study with different co-authors, which actually try to calculate the amount above which, once a family's income goes there, they won't send the kid to school. That is a long-term solution. It's growth. No family wants to do it. Now, I'm not saying we don't fight against child labor, but think about how you fight it. You fight against it with a blunt tool like ban kar do, campaign kar do, and all that. And no journalist who does these stories does a follow-up on what happens to the children. We are lucky Oxfam and UNICEF did these studies. People don't follow up. They've achieved the thing. They feel virtuous. We are such good people. We are good human beings. And they forget about it. And the kids' lives can become hell if they continue at all. And this is terrible, and this is another class of, anti-capitalist. Like, another kind of anti-capitalism that I despise is this new term that has come into fashion called degrowth. I was at a party a few days ago, and there were acquaintances there from all kinds of places, and there was one of them, a very successful professional from Hyderabad, who was sipping a single malt and saying that, I find the word degrowth very attractive. We should do degrowth. We've had enough growth and all of that. And I couldn't, it is just so immoral. And I said as much. I said, free speech is fine, and please say whatever you want, but everything you're saying is deeply immoral, because degrowth hurts the poor. आप स्वीडन में बैठ के you can say whatever fashionable thing you want, but growth is what gets people out of poverty. Our friend Nitin Pai, I think, once calculated that every 2% for India over the last 30 years, every 2% rise in GDP, every 1% rise in GDP gets 2 million people out of poverty. 2 million people. It's a number to many folks. If you've already escaped poverty, आराम से बैठे हो, it's a number to you. It's not a number. 2 million people. These are real human beings who can live better lives, who can fulfill their aspirations, whose kids can go to better schools. It's a big deal.
And Amit, show us your last element of elite belief that is characterized as luxury beliefs.
So my last one is something I have spoken about so much, you could like make t-shirts and just put that, is price controls, right? It's price controls where the elite belief will be that XYZ is too expensive, put a price control. Or if there is a scarcity, there's a natural calamity, airplane seats are too expensive, we can't get out, put a price control, right? And I will tell you, gentle reader, let's run a thought experiment. What would happen tomorrow if the government said, ki dekho, cars are becoming very expensive. Cars should be affordable by everybody. Every Indian should have a car. Let's put price control, no car above 10,000 rupees. Right? Now, what will happen? Pause the video if you don't know the answer already. Pause the video and think about it. Have you paused? I just did statue to myself. That wasn't a pause. You didn't pause. Okay. So here's what will happen. Cars that cannot be manufactured for less than 10,000 bucks, which is all cars, will completely go out. There will be a complete scarcity out there. And the cars that do exist will sell on the black market for far more than whatever the sticker price was. The entire industry will die out completely. Now, I've given an extreme example, but when you put a price control, that is exactly what happens. We'll link to episodes and we've done on this. We'll link to pieces we've written on this. But what happens is that some elite virtue signaling fool will sit somewhere and think XYZ is too expensive for the poor, let me fix a price. Arey Baba, the price is a signal of all the scarcities in the world, all the constraints of the world. It carries an incentive to people to produce more of them. If you take that information away, you are always going to have scarcities. I had, there was a price control on stents a few years back. I had tweeted right then, I know what will happen. There will be scarcity. There were scarcities. And stents, people died. Right? So it is not a small matter. I have written a column on Uber. We'll link that from the show notes. Under my chair, all right? Don't come up. Be under the chair. And so we'll kind of link that also, where Uber search pricing, if it's implemented well by Uber and their algo works faithfully, it is great. Because if you ban search pricing, then you will have shortages, that you want to take someone to the hospital, you got a flight to catch, they're out because it's first come, first serve. This is just basic economics. I've spoken about it before on the show. I don't want to belabor the point, it's such an easy elite belief to have. There's this line from Yes Minister that we must do something, this is something, let's do it. And I feel the intellectually lazy resort to these kind of luxury beliefs to make themselves feel that we have done something, we care about the world, we care about the poor. No, you're hurting the poor, all these hurt the poor. We have to have the rigor and the energy to think these through. So Ajay, I have ranted and raved, which is my, elite privilege. It is a luxury that I, get to enjoy. But, what are your thoughts?
Because I'm a card-carrying economist, okay, and here is my card. I always apply the methodological strategy of saying, why are people doing this? Okay, so what's the optimization? What are the rational reasons that lead so many people who are in that upper class to then have these luxury beliefs which harm other people? Okay, so I mean, one simple notion is, I have already acquired my wealth and prosperity, and I don't care about others, and then it's costless for me to espouse these things which will harm poor people. But you know what? I don't care. I mean, that's a simple and cynical approach to doing it, but that still doesn't give us a positive explanation of why favor those kinds of beliefs. Okay, so I'm just wondering what might be at work, and here are a couple of hypotheses, and you will also have some thoughts on this subject. So one notion is something related to an old conception of philanthropy, that rich people don't feel safe, and it's prudent to build temples, to build hospitals, to build schools, and say certain pious, nice phrases because you're worried that one day there will be folks with pitchforks who will come after you. And a lot of the Indian state is quite populist. So then by that logic, it also buys some amount of safety when compared with the state. So this is one kind of rational argument that uh, the rich espouse these beliefs because it makes them safer. Okay, and we can see that may be true for some people. Another line of attack is the fashions and the clubs where it sounds very nice. Oh, we support poor people, we care about poor people, we're so empathetic. And intellectual capabilities are placed at a discount. So moral fervor, my intentions are right. I care about poor people, and never mind that I may champion mechanisms that will actually harm poor people. But this makes me look good in the eyes of other people, and it makes other people think that I am a nice, warm, caring, empathetic person, and then others might be more inclined to like me or be with me or collaborate with me. Okay, so this could be a second line of attack. A third line of attack could be, so imagine that at random this kind of idea takes root. Then it becomes a very talk is cheap method for unrelated people to lay claim to membership of those clubs. So, to buy a Louis Vuitton bag is at least expensive. Here, it's talk is free. So, it is an efficient way for people to portray a certain package of beliefs that makes other people think that you are part of a certain kind of group and community. And this could go with an upgrade in your status, which may be what people might like. So they may not believe a word of this, but it might be efficient to claim these kinds of things. And then I'm reminded of the whole preference falsification idea of Timur Quran that you and I have spoken about many times, where people say anything, people will say all kinds of things. People will always, say things that they think will help them to get ahead, to gain power, to gain influence, to be safer. And so then this whole package could fit under that. But to uphold this equilibrium, what you do need is a certain kind of intellectual soft-headedness, that there should be a shortage of people who get this shit, who are able to call out the fanciful claims. So you have to start, to make this model work, you have to start with a broad base of doctor engineer capabilities where there is very low knowledge of social science and humanities. And then into that fertile ground, you can sprinkle these beliefs and suddenly, oh, we're such good people, we care about poor people. So maybe there is this package at work.
I have a couple of points to make, and one point is that we lie to ourselves as much as we lie to others. We want to tell a simple story to ourselves about, hey, we are good people. So a lot of these beliefs which help you signal virtue, you are also signaling virtue to yourself and not to others. It is a convenient way of doing so. You don't have to do good deeds and make the world a better place. You can just hold these opinions into 80 characters and your job is kind of done. So while at one level I get it that whether it is out of fear or currying favor with the government, fear of the government or currying favor from the government, it might be rational to take these positions while knowing that the position is wrong. But a lot of people, if not most people who hold these positions, I will give them credit where credit is due, that their intentions are good. They really believe that they care about the poor. They really believe that this is compassion and they don't have the intellectual rigor. The second point I want to make is that, and it's a dual point, and they might even seem to contradict each other. But part one is about modern times and social media. That what happens on social media is you go online and then you want the comfort of community. You want to feel you belong, you want to feel respected. The easiest way of doing this is by joining an ideological tribe, either on the right or the left. And then you want to raise your status within the tribe. So not only do you uncritically accept all the dogmas of that particular tribe, but then eventually you begin attacking people on the other side, never arguments, only people on the other side, and then you begin attacking people on your own side for not showing adequate purity, which is why a lot of the cancellation that happens from your own tribe only, just knocking your head off. And And this creates an incentive for extremism, and it also creates a sort of doubling down. Like, I said a lot of silly things when I was 17, 18, right? I read Marx and Engels, and I said a lot of silly things. Now, if they were on social media forever and people had screenshots, what would happen is that once I express them on social media, I am embraced by that tribe, then I feel the incentive to double down on them for ego reasons, and then I become that person. I don't have that intellectual growth I might otherwise have. So that is something I worry about. But my second point here, which might contradict the first a little bit, is that, Ajay, it was always thus. Thomas Sowell has a great book called Vision of the Anointed, where the subtitle is Self-Congratulation as a Basis for Social Policy, right, which speaks to what we are talking about, self-congratulation as a basis for social policy. And he has these great lines there that I want to read out. What a vision may offer, and what the prevailing vision of our time emphatically does offer, is a special state of grace for those who believe in it. Those who accept this vision are deemed to be not merely factually correct, but morally on a higher plane. Put differently, those who disagree with the prevailing vision are seen as being not merely in error, but in sin. For those who have this vision of the world, the anointed and the benighted do not argue on the same moral plane or play by the same cold rules of logic and evidence. The benighted are to be made aware, to have their consciousness raised, and the wistful hope is held out that they will grow. Should the benighted prove recalcitrant, however, then their mean-spiritedness must be fought, and the real reasons behind their arguments and actions exposed. While verbal fashions change, this basic picture of the differential rectitude of the anointed and the benighted has not changed fundamentally in at least 200 years. Stop quote. Incredible quote gets to the heart of the problem and also gets to something that we spoke about in our last episode, that these two are hardwired in us. The desire to belong in a tribe, the desire to always keep showing our virtue. And by the way, gentle listener, I often say those who signal the most virtue possess the least. And I have found this to be true, especially of men, so watch out. And yeah, so, so these are sort of my broad thoughts on it, that it is hardwired in us to be tribalistic in this manner, and we've seen that, we've spoken about that in episode 42 as well, populism, the direction of the Republican Party and what has happened to it. And at the same time, it is exacerbated in a sense by social media, which plays to the worst demons of our nature, as it were, instead of the better angels.
I want to say two last things. First is, I agree with you that there's a thin line between cold calculation and self-belief. And I do believe that many people believe the things that they are saying. Strange as it may seem, there are many people who believe these things. So, one can see that kind of phenomenon, that there is an initial condition. Some people choose these kinds of anti-poor views out of rational self-interest. They become a kernel, and then others gravitate around them, wanting to be seen as cool or wanting to seek tribe membership, and then suddenly it becomes a pattern. So there is undoubtedly that kind of phenomenon going on. I do want to stick to a cold rational set of arguments, and I think that these are things to think about. They sound very gloomy, but these are important things to think about. I think again and again in many countries, there are rich people and business people who have economized on their knowledge of society, okay, who have economized on understanding the humanities and the social sciences, who have concentrated on their business, who built their business. I feel they've often made an intellectual error by seeking out the strongman, by collaborating with a strongman, by thinking that my strong man will deliver me the goods and everything will be well. And again, we have so many examples from all over the world where the populist leaders have actually been bad for economic growth in general, and have very often put the knife into the people in the business community that have supported them. Okay, so in Saudi Arabia, MBS led a shakedown of hundreds of rich people grabbing their money and their wealth. In China, Xi Jinping led the attack on the rich and partly destroyed them, partly expropriated them. In Russia, Putin led the attack against the rich. And each individual billionaire at some point thought that, no, I'm the insider. I will get special favors by the government. And for some time it seems to work. But in steady state, it didn't. And I think that we need more of an intellectual understanding that what works as strategy, what works as sustainable long term paths to build firms is only one recipe, and that is rule of law and liberal democracy. That allying with the populists often proves to be a mistake for the rich people who think that this is expedient. Amit, that's a great conversation around luxury beliefs. Can you give us your reading ideas for today?
Yeah, so my reading idea is a controversial book, and perhaps one day we'll do an episode with this title. It's a book by Walter Block called Defending the Undefendable, where Block takes ideas that are otherwise considered, beyond the pale, and he defends them. And it's a beautiful book. It's an important book, and we should all read it. And I thought of this book because to many people it must be saying, "Ki yaar, Amit is defending sweatshops." Yes, I am. Right? That Amit is saying prostitution should be legal. Yes, absolutely, I am. Right? And I gave my reasonings for them. So similarly, in this book, you will sort of have Walter Block, who's a great Austrian economist, making arguments and helping you think in different ways. You don't have to agree with him. But the important thing is these conversations are important. In fact, even you, gentle reader, can disagree with many of the things that I have said. But I think it is important to keep talking rather than, just blindly accept the dogma of a particular tribe and so on and so forth. Please don't do that. Respect yourself enough to think independently about everything and not take stuff for granted, right? If you join any particular tribe and just accept all the dogma from A to Z and never disagree with them on anything, you're clearly doing something wrong. So I'd say that, we all have a stake in the world. We have skin in the game. This is the only life we live. This is the only world we have. So think for yourself. Do not pass judgment easily on things that you don't understand. Ajay, another thing that really irritates me these days is the desire of people to have opinions for everything, right? You've studied something for 30 seconds, instinctively कुछ भी बक दिया 280 characters में, earlier 140 characters में, कुछ भी बोल दिया. And when that happens on a subject I know something about, I'll be like, what the hell? You've thought about that for 30 seconds. I have read about it for 30 years. I've immersed myself. And we are supposed to, on Twitter, we are on equal ground. I'm probably the one who will get mobbed and cancelled. So I would just say that you don't have to have an opinion on everything. What you know about, have an opinion by all means. And when it comes to values, be firm on your values. When it comes to the facts of the world is deeply complex. Be open, listen to people who disagree with you. That's the only way to grow.
Gentle reader, Amit doesn't know that he's been mobbed and cancelled.